Yeah, thank you, Director Canninger, and thank you for being here today. I'd like to talk about an issue of tremendous importance to the people in my district and to 44 million Americans across the country, the enormous economic and consumer protection challenges posed by student debt. Today, you've heard a lot of enthusiasm for fact-based policies here, and there is a considerable concern across the ideological spectrum about the significant lack of data for what is now the second largest consumer debt market in the country. Collecting data to better understand consumer markets and so being able to anticipate the next crisis before it happens was a critical design goal when we created the Bureau less than a decade ago, one that I hope the Bureau still considers a top priority. And with that backdrop in mind, I was heartened to see the Bureau, under Director Cordray, take steps to begin systematically collecting data on the student loan market. In February 2017, the Bureau, using its specific authorization under Section 1022C4 of Dodd-Frank, published a proposal to require that the largest private companies in the student loan industry, including some of the biggest banks and the government's biggest contractors, provide data directly to the Bureau about the performance of more than $1 trillion in outstanding student debt and about the borrower's experiences in repaying that debt. This would include information, for example, on the total size of the loan market, the percentage of the loan modifications that are entered into, delinquency rates, forbearance and deferment rates, default and discharge information, basic stuff, but all of which would be crucial in understanding the student loan market at a macro level and potentially preventing version 2.0 of the mortgage lending crisis. And now, after taking public comment on this proposal, the Bureau then submitted it to the OMB in September 2017, 8 weeks prior to Director Cordray's departure. The OMB would then normally evaluate comments from the public and authorize the Bureau to finalize this market monitoring initiative, collecting data and greatly improving the transparency of the student loan market. But in this case, no OMB approval was issued and your agency has done nothing. Notably, Mick Mulvaney was operating both as acting director of the CFPB and the director of OMB during much of this time. It now appears that this critical data collection initiative has been in a state of limbo for nearly a year and a half, during which time more than 1.5 million Americans defaulted on their student loans. What I'm trying to understand is why this important initiative, one that simply seeks to gather data and shed greater transparency on the student loan market, has been ignored for so long. I'm a scientist, and I see this as really a troubling pattern from this administration of suppressing even the collection of data when they are afraid that the facts may not support their opinions, a pattern that we see everywhere from climate change to the default rates for-profit colleges. So, Director Canninger, first question, did Betsy DeVos or any other political appointees at the U.S. Department of Education provide feedback or encourage the Bureau to abandon or delay this proposal?
Congressman, I'm sorry to say that I'm unfamiliar with the proposal you're referring to. I've actually just asked the staff to, and we're trying to find out what it is. I have not had anyone mention this to me before. I understand why you'd be interested in it. I certainly understand the extent of the marketplace and the growing student debt issue, so it is something that I'm paying attention to. I can tell you some things that I am doing in this space, but I will have to get back to you on this particular study.
Okay, I'd like to know specifically any feedback you received from any personnel, political personnel at the Department of Education, whether the Office of Management and Budget has ever communicated any specific concerns about this, or did they just sit on it? And does the Bureau plan to retract it or continue? And I encourage you to perhaps contact Mr. Frotman, maybe a member of the second panel who is familiar with some of the details in this. So let's see, I have 44 seconds. Just quickly to another issue. It's been noted that several recent CFPB enforcement settlements didn't require compensation for victims for any of the harm they suffered from the firm's conduct. And so who personally takes that decision as to whether or not a firm should have to pay restitution to victims?
So that is a complicated issue. Certainly in the course of the investigation, the enforcement attorneys are looking at trying to quantify consumer harm and look at how they can identify the
But who
consumers
makes the
who are
decision?
harmed.
Do you make the decision, or?
Ultimately, I make the decision based on the recommendations of the staff that worked the issue and reviewed it along the way to get to me.
Thank you. Yield back.